So China has become more and more totalitarian. So my term is high technology totalitarianism. This is really unprecedented. It was not in Soviet Union, not in South Korea, and the Chinese Communist Party uses the high technology, like artificial intelligence, the big data, the facial recognition, the surveillance cameras, to tighten its total control on society. And what's happening in Xinjiang is really horrible. That the Chinese Communist Party even uses the algorithm to target Uyghur people and common people before they commit any crime, and up to 2 million Uyghurs and other Muslim minorities were put into the concentration camps, and they are brainwashed and tortured, and they were forced to sing the pro-party songs, to learn Chinese, and this is genocide. This is modern cultural genocide. This is kind of genocide. It's a slow genocide. So I think especially after Xi Jinping came to power in 2012, China's human rights situation is deteriorating very much. Xi Jinping's father was one of the top leaders of the Communist Party, but generally speaking, he's kind of open-minded party leader, kind of reformer, and many people used to predict that Xi Jinping might be a reformer, but that's totally wrong. And Xi Jinping is true believer of the power, the Communist Party's power, and he was educated as a red princeling, and was I think his biggest purpose, his biggest dream, is to prolong the power of the Communist Party. So when the Communist Party is facing crisis, political and ideological and economic crisis, Xi Jinping chose to tighten its control of the society, to tighten the one-party rule, and there are many problems in China, the social, political, economic problems, and we know that if the Chinese government reform the political and social systems and going to liberal democracy and rule of law, and many I think most of these problems would be solved easily, but that's not Xi Jinping's choice, and that's not the Communist Party's choice. So in their opinion, the only choice is to crack down on the dissidents and the civil society, and then maintain its monopoly of power. So it's kind of amazing in China, in such a repressive regime, the human rights movement, we call it the rights defense movement, could be developed, and many human rights lawyers and bloggers and activists join this movement, and it became more and more powerful, mainly in Hu Jintao year before 2012. And I think that's the major reason of the crackdown. So the movement was crushed because the movement had achievement as an amazing achievement. It became more and more organized, more and more politicized, and it gained more and more support from the international community and from the civil society. And then that movement was seen by the government as a big threat, urgent threat to the one-party rule. And then there was a roundup of human rights lawyers, and many human rights organizations were shut down, and dissidents and activists were put into prison, and then the totalitarianism, the high technology totalitarianism, and its surveillance state is looming. That many high level technologies have been used to monitor, to follow, to control the human rights activists, and this makes the movement, the resistance, very difficult. So so I think most of Chinese activists are not optimistic because of the new level of control. So it's like a double-edged sword. When internet was introduced in China in mid-1990s, so many people, not only Chinese people, feel it could be a hope for Chinese civil society, for Chinese democracy, because it's so difficult for the government to censor, to control the internet information, and it's more difficult for authoritarian, totalitarian government to censor and control the internet information than the traditional information. And we did use internet to disseminate our information, to mobilize people to develop our movement. But the government has more power to use or to abuse the internet, the social media. The internet censorship is strict, and in China we can't get access to Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. So all these mainstream social media were blocked, and millions of foreign websites were blocked. And we do have some kind of social media, but these social media are totally sponsored and controlled by Chinese government. This social media are operated by a company, sometimes private company, but in reality they are controlled by the party. Like WeChat, it's a Chinese version of WhatsApp. Like Weibo, it's China's Twitter. So for example, we are not able to post information about Falun Gong or the Tibet or Tiananmen, like that. We just can't. Technically, we can't read something on this social media about these sensitive issues. Yeah. So before 2013, we could use kind of VPN to zap the Great Firewall (GFW), and then some of these human rights defenders could use Twitter or Facebook, and like Google, Gmail, and we can apply for we can open a blog, a website, but it's not possible to talk about these sensitive issues like Falun Gong or Tiananmen, or the Xinjiang or Tibet. So we can write some articles on our blog, but we can talk about some individual cases, but not the sensitive things, very sensitive things. That's if you post something very sensitive, then it's very it's likely and that your post will be immediately deleted, disappeared, and also likely your whole account, like Weibo or WeChat or the blog account, was deleted. Yeah. So now it's even more difficult. Like the VPNs were banned in China. It's more difficult for Chinese internet users to access to foreign website. Then the brainwashing work, the propaganda, is more effective. So I think many international organizations have done a lot to support Chinese human rights defenders, to help disseminate the information, to give them awards, and sometimes we got a fund or training from the international societies, but I think this very important for the international society to provide more support for Chinese human rights activists. Especially the general policy toward China is not in favor of human rights. So I criticize the China policy of all these Western countries very much. They adopt kind of engagement policy. And they always prioritize business trade with China over human rights issues. And so one thing is they thought to engage in China, to let China enter the World Trade Organization, to let China sign on the international human rights treaties, and to cooperate with Chinese government and the pro-government organizations would promote rule of law and human rights in China, and they also take it for granted that the market economy and globalization will lead China to a more open society, but that didn't happen. So I think an engagement policy without prioritizing human rights is quite misleading. It's similar to appeasement, and they are doing business with a dictatorial regime, and they didn't criticize the atrocities. They didn't criticize what the concentration camps in Xinjiang and the brutalities in Hong Kong and Tibet. That's facilitating Chinese government. That's not helpful for Chinese society, for the people who are resisting the regime. What the Western government have been doing, what the Western companies have been doing, are really facilitating the Chinese government. For one clear example is that many Western companies, the tech giants like Cisco, like Google, they sell the technologies and equipment to Chinese government to establish the Great Firewall system. And so without their technology, their training, their equipment, then the machine of censorship, the GFW, won't be so effective. Yeah. So the policy of sanction may be controversial. It has pros and cons, but the current situation is the Western companies, the Western government do business with China, and they don't care about human rights. They don't give pressure to Chinese government, and so that's I think they help a dictatorship to be more prosperous and to be more powerful. And so what I'm trying to say is the current policy is wrong. It's misleading. They are not good for the people who want a liberal and democratic China. For the best scenario, some Western government criticized Chinese government, and they mentioned the political prisoners, the concentration camps. They criticized China in the United Nations, the Human Rights Council, but that's it. They didn't do much more than lip service. So if Chinese government doesn't feel the real pressure, yeah, that's Magnitsky Act is a good idea. They can punish the human rights violators and the corrupt government officials, and they can also freeze the assets of these human rights abusers and corrupt officials. But it will be very good to have more and more Magnitsky Act in Western countries, but it's still not enough. There are many things the world can do, but they didn't want to do that. For example, to boycott Beijing Olympics. So Beijing should not be given the opportunity to host Olympics. In 2008, the Beijing Olympics, and China promised to improve its human rights when applying for the Olympic Games, but the Olympic Games became a chance for Chinese government to abuse, to take away the people's land, to arrest and detain and torture more people, and China was even given the another opportunity to host the 2022 Winter Olympics, and that's wrong. And the world should boycott the Beijing Olympics. And when the concentration camps are expanding, people were suffering there. It's a shame to the world if Beijing could host the Olympics, and China also hosted APEC meetings, G20, World Expo. Yeah, I think that's something Beijing cared about. So if we boycott, or if we threaten to boycott these international events, that would be working. So the first thing is China has no freedom of information, freedom of expression, and then the brainwashing. The education system is like a brainwashing, and majority of Chinese people have been brainwashed, and then the resistance, the risk of resistance is quite high, and people know that it's too dangerous to participate in any human rights activities or political dissents. And another thing is the Communist Party kind of ironically encourage people to be addicted to consumerism. Their meaning of so for most people, the meaning of life is like to buy luxury cars, luxury houses, and that's to buy these things and to enjoy these material stuff. Then so the mentality of Chinese people is like a political indifference. It's pervasive. The vast majority of Chinese people don't care about human rights or democracy or rule of law. Only a few people like human rights lawyers and dissidents, the NGO activists, they are willing to sacrifice to promote human rights and rule of law in China. And when the central government tightens its control, and censor more on information, and punish more on these human rights activists, then this political fear and political indifference will be more severe. So when when the situation was not so severe, then people could join this movement, and when their basic rights and freedom were violated very much. For example, if a person's land or houses were taken away without compensation, or if somebody was put into prison without committing any crime, then they could be standing up to the government, or some people like these human rights lawyers who have strong belief in human rights and freedom, and they are willing to risk their freedom, their job to push forward rule of law in China. Mm-hmm. So I became a human rights lawyer in 2003 when I was teaching at a university in Beijing, and I founded a couple of human rights organizations in Beijing, and so I took a lot of human rights cases like Falun Gong practitioners, Tibetans, Uyghurs, and the wrongful conviction cases, and the victim of torture, one-child policy, and forced demolition. And because of that, I was banned from teaching, and eventually I was fired by the university, and I was put under house arrest from time to time, and I was disbarred, and my passport was confiscated, and then I was kidnapped and disappeared for 3 times by Chinese secret police, and during detention I was tortured, mentally tortured and physical torture. So I was put under a solitary, extreme form of solitary confinement for 70 days. I was forced to sit down on the floor, facing the wall, with handcuff 24/7, and so and many of my colleagues, my friends were put into prison. So when I was dealing with these cases, I knew a lot of Chinese human rights defenders and activists who were severely tortured, who were forced to move from one place to another, and their family members were also targeted. For me, my wife, my children were also got this collective punishment. For example, when I was when I came to the United States with one of my children, my wife and one of my children were prevented from leaving China. So they were used by Chinese government as hostages in order to punish me and also to silence me. And my wife used to work in the company, a Chinese company, but she worked for that company for 17 years. But she was fired because of my political activities. She was told that because of me, the company couldn't sell their products to Chinese government and Chinese military. So that's my experience in China and also in the United States. So even when I live here, I can still feel the pressure from Chinese government. They give their influence, the influence of Chinese Communist Party is still powerful in a free country like here. One example is my book was refused to publish by ABA. Actually, ABA, the American Bar Association, invited me to write a book about my human rights work. But after I signed the agreement, they rescinded the proposal, and they told me to publish my book will anger Chinese government and will put their programs in China in danger. So that's a typical case of self-censorship. And I also have the experience that my scheduled talk was cancelled by an Ivy League university in the United States. I'm still working on that book. I will
try
for
to
another publisher. I was in Hong Kong as a visiting scholar at CUHK. So I'm one of the initiators of the New Citizens movement, and we promoted some human rights activities like equal educational rights. We also organized the activities to demand the disclosure of official assets, and we organized the activity called joint citizen meals. We put the like-minded people together in the city, and we discuss the local human rights issues. We discuss about political transition in China, and then the whole movement was cracked down, and some of the activists of the movement were arrested. That was after March 2013, and then the main leader of this movement, Dr. Xu Zhiyong, was arrested in July that year, and then another activist, actually, who is a billionaire in China. He might be the only one billionaire who publicly supported the human rights movement in China, and he was also arrested, and then so at that time I lived in Shenzhen, so I traveled back and forth from Hong Kong and mainland China. But after that billionaire was arrested, it was quite obvious that if I went back to China, I would be definitely arrested and got a long-term imprisonment. So I decided not to go back. Some participants of that New Citizens movement were sentenced to 3 years, 4 years, and I'm the one of the initiators. So I got longer term. My brothers and sister are still in China. My parents passed away, and my wife and one of my daughters were prevented from international travel, and then we talked with Chinese secret police, but they didn't let them go, and eventually they smuggled themselves out of China. It was a risky journey from China to Burma to Laos and Thailand. So I'm kind of lucky because I can leave China and live in a free country, but I have the strong feeling of survivor's guilt. Many Chinese human rights defenders and dissidents are still in prison, and I lost my battlefield. I can't fight for human rights in China on ground with them. So the survivor's guilt is one thing. Another thing is I have to start from zero. In China, I taught in a university. I have PhD, and I'm kind of famous, and have so many classmates, relatives, and the supporting system, and I speak my native language. But here, I can't rely on all these things. I have to learn a new language, and I have to look for a job. It's not easy. I didn't study American law. I didn't have a degree in the States. So I continue my research, and I keep regular contact with Chinese human rights activists, but it's difficult for me to get kind of permanent job. I can't give up. I still continue my human rights work. There are some work that is not possible in China, or too dangerous in China. For example, to give testimony at the congressional hearings, and to share information with international human rights organizations, to transfer money from here to Chinese political prisoners, and to conduct some interviews to call for the release of Chinese lawyers and human rights defenders, and also to advocate some Chinese political prisoners to get human rights prize. yeah, there are many things we can do in a foreign country. So I'm busy with my research and my human rights advocacy. Yeah, but it's not likely for me and the dissidents like me to go back to China in 10 years maybe. So I don't know, but I work hard for that day. Current situation in China is getting worse and worse. Not only human rights lawyers and dissidents were rounded up, but everything in the civil society has been targeted, like the non-government organizations, underground churches, Tibetans and Uyghurs in Hong Kong, and internet, the universities. So the Chinese government is going towards a more totalitarian system, and that's not only a threat to the basic rights and freedom of Chinese people, but also urgent threat, the biggest threat to the free international order. It's also a threat to liberal democracies in the world. We have talked about some examples of China's threat to academic freedom of expression in American universities, and also some other alarming cases. For example, Gui Minhai, who is a publisher and who has Swedish passport, was kidnapped in Thailand and then was sent back to China and disappeared. So that's really terrible. Chinese government kidnapped a foreign citizen on the foreign soil and then disappeared. So that's a threat to freedom of everyone. So that's my current research topic too. That how China became a threat to global human rights, freedom, and democracy. Yeah, so I think it's my obligation to push forward human rights and freedom in China. It's something about human dignity. I'm a scholar, I'm a lawyer, so I have to fight for truth and dignity. If I don't do that, I will be suffering more. And I have seen many Chinese citizens standing up against the regime, even though it's so dangerous, but people are still willing to join this resistance. That's the hope. So we continue our resistance, our human rights work, not because we will see the victory, but because we are fighting for the human dignity, and we can't be silent when the atrocities are so obvious, so clear, and when we live in this country, when we live in this time, that's our destiny, that's our responsibility. For example, the number of human rights lawyers in China at the beginning of the rights defense movement was like 20, 30 all over China, but by 2013 maybe the number might be 1,000. So it was developed very rapidly. And then the roundup of lawyers in 2015, and then thousands of human rights defenders were detained. So it's really hard to be that optimistic. And the high technology. So it's like an advanced version of 1984. Then it's very, very hard to mobilize people into this movement. Yeah. So the threshold has been different. For example, we've taken so many sensitive cases, and I wrote articles to criticize the party, the system, the number one leader, and I got trouble. But if I did the same thing, if I do the same thing today in China, so the trouble would be definitely different. That's 10 times harsher than before. Yeah. It's so disappointing.
Yes.
So I read some articles linking the current situation in China to the Nazi system, and the current policy is similar to appeasement. They didn't. Most of the scholars and politicians, decision makers, haven't realized the threat from China, from the Chinese government. Yeah, of course the Holocaust is not is maybe unique. It's not comparable, but the threat to civilization now is really urgent. Yeah. And Chinese government is driven by two things. One is fear, another is global ambition. So it has a ambition like a One Belt, One Road, the Belt and Road initiative, like what's happening in South China Sea, and China's military threat to Taiwan, and Hong Kong, of course. Hong Kong, but the Chinese government, it's like a civil war.
Yes, it is.
It's terrible. I've written a few articles on Hong Kong, and of course, totally supportive of Hong Kong protesters. Yeah, but one thing is, Chinese government is so effective in inciting the nationalism sentiment. Most Chinese people, 99% of Chinese people, don't support Hong Kong protesters, and they were told by the propaganda, the party media that these protesters are terrorists, and they created the chaos and violence, and they want to separate Hong Kong from China, like that. Yeah, and it's similar in Xinjiang. So most Chinese people don't know the truth in Xinjiang, and they were told it's just like this. The people in the camps, they call it vocational training centers, are merely terrorists and separatists. So they just endorse and support what the Chinese government doing in Xinjiang. And there are some activists, dissidents living in this area, New Jersey, yeah, and so not too many. Like the professors on China study, the self-censor, they most of them don't want to criticize Beijing because they won't go to China to do research and field work, and Chinese students don't want to talk about this because they even though they are sympathetic our cause, they don't publicly support us because they are monitored by Chinese government, like the informants, and so there have been more and more reports on CSSA, so the Chinese Students and Scholars Associations. So their function is to block sensitive topics being discussed and to monitor Chinese students, and they report to Chinese consulates. In the United States, there are 350,000 Chinese students, and a lot of CSSAs and sponsored by Chinese consulates. Yeah. It's like a Confucius Institute. So it's an institution operated by Chinese government publicly, not like a CSSA and seemingly autonomous students group, but same thing. They work for Chinese Communist Party. Yeah. So I'm teaching human rights in China at City University of New York. So Chinese students don't come. Right. And so a few weeks ago, a panel discussion in which I'm a panelist was cancelled by Columbia University. Yeah. So the CSSA there threatened to protest against that panel, and then the university just cancelled the event. Yeah, so there are many similar things happened. The Chinese operations and Chinese government gave pressure to a university in Canada, Australia, New Zealand, yeah, and then they cancel a speech, or they cancel events. Yeah, that's that has been happening many years. I think also in Germany, this CSSA. I mean, there was a report recently on a university in Germany. I forgot the name. Yeah, a Berlin Industrial University something. Yeah.
The technical university.
Yeah, technical university in Berlin. Yeah. So the CSSA there tried to threaten speakers on Hong Kong and Xinjiang back then. Yeah. China, especially China, is supporting all these dictatorial regimes in Africa, in Asia, and but at the same time, the democratic countries are not united like before. A few months ago, some democratic countries signed a letter to the head of United Nations criticizing Xinjiang. And then Chinese government organized 50 countries to sign another letter to support China's Xinjiang policy. Yeah. Including many Muslim majority countries. Yeah. When China persecutes Muslims so brutally, and the Muslim majority countries, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Sudan,
they sent a letter of support.
Yeah. They sent 50 countries sent a letter to the head of UN Human Rights Council maybe to support Chinese government. And yeah. Yeah, it's like 50 countries wrote a letter to support Hitler. That's something happening today. That's unacceptable. So we are outnumbered. The democracy countries are outnumbered. 20 of them say no to China, and 50 say yes to China, and 100. The rest of countries keep silent. Yeah, they join the first letter, but they dare not to say no to China. Yeah.